All right, everybody. So, welcome to the second part of this lecture, where we are going to be talking about the example essay that I wrote. Whoops, having some funny things going on with the screen over here. I don't know why that's doing that. Well, this could be creative. Okay, so if we look over here, I created an essay, an example essay called Genre Analysis, Important Components of an Instruction Manual. And so what I did is I sat down and I thought, well, if I was supposed to write an instruction manual for something, it might be a good idea to conduct an analysis to see how manuals are structured in the first place, right? So let's suppose for my supposed product that I want to have the most successful instruction manual possible. So it would be good to collect a sample of instruction manuals and to go through and look at what each of them does, and then look at them collectively and say, okay, well, they all have these sorts of things in common. And so my instruction manual ought to have these things also. And so that's what I did here. And I did it in conjunction with the PowerPoint slide that we went, or the PowerPoint that we went through last class. So, essay structure. You begin with a brief description or discussion of the genre that you're going to focus on. And so I did that here. So if you look at it, I just briefly talk about instruction manuals and how they may seem unimportant to most people until they need to install or build something, right? Then it becomes very important. And then I stated a thesis or an implied. So your thesis can be either stated or implied. I'm sorry, that's what I'm trying to say. Mine was more or less stated. So I said down here, this analysis will look at these manuals and determine what they all have in common and attempt to understand what qualities or elements should be included when designing an instruction manual. So that's the purpose of this paper. I want to understand the qualities that should be included when creating an instruction manual. And I also did a brief discussion about the manuals that I included, right? So these are them. It's ever so brief, just to give the reader an idea of the sources that I drew from, right? So I'm not spending a lot of time talking about it, but I am spending a little bit of time just to help the reader understand where my analysis derived from. All right, so second paragraph. To understand why instruction manuals are designed as written as they are, an analysis must first understand a little bit about the intended audience. So if we go to the next one, the next slide, who is the intended audience for the genre? What is a discourse community or communities the audience is in? And so I basically went down and I tried to answer these questions here from what I gathered according to my analysis. And I said, the intended audience for instruction manuals are largely people that are ignorant of the task ahead of them. Now, this is true in most cases. If you're a subcontractor or a professional contractor that does these things for a living, you probably really don't need that manual unless you're looking at something that's just slightly different from, like, say, one brand screws their ceiling fan in slightly different from another brand, right? But generally speaking, through experience, you probably learn how to do that, and so the instruction manual is less important to you. But for the do-it-yourselfers and the weekend warriors, those instruction manuals are everything, right? They need that. And so I said they are probably largely ignorant of the task that they're facing. So then I said, while some of the artifacts readers may have an idea of the task they are involved in, many are attempting it for the first time, right? So that's true. So I also said that the audience varies on their knowledge and experience during dealing with electrical and plumbing basics. And because of this, they're likely to know little about installation. And they are likely to spend significant amount of time reading the manual. Okay, so that kind of speaks to the fourth point. How much time will this audience want to spend with the information presented in the genre? Well, I mean, when you start a project, maybe on a Saturday, a ceiling fan, you would expect an hour, maybe 2 hours, depending how it goes, right? So the first thing you do want to do is you carefully read the instruction manual because you don't quite know what you're doing. And so the more effective the instruction manual, the easier the task is to accomplish. So if it ends up taking you all day, there was either a problem with the instruction manual or some kind of difficulty that arose during installation. So I think that for most people, there is this expectation that I'm installing a ceiling fan at 8 in the morning. I'm going to be done before lunchtime, whenever that is, somewhere between 11, 12, or 1, right? Like probably earlier. So it is something you would expect to get done in a morning or in an afternoon. So then let's talk about the considerations, what this does for that. So it greatly affects the way that the manuals are designed, right? Thinking about time and who your audience is. All of these manuals start out with cautions and warnings either on the cover or on the front manual. So I noticed that, right? I noticed that there were cautions and that there were warnings. The main focus of these cautions or warnings were to inform the reader of the need of knowledge in electrical and, if needed, plumbing basics, right? So the dishwasher, which maybe a lot of people don't necessarily have, right? And so they're giving you these warnings beforehand to let you know that this is going to take some basic knowledge and you might need to brush up on that also before you begin the project. I also found that organization was key in designing of the manual. So after the warnings come a list of all parts that are included in the box and other materials that were not included. So each manual did this. Here's what's in the box. Here's what you're going to need. You need to take an inventory before you begin this project to make sure everything's included and everything's there, right? That's going to be key to a successful installation in a quick amount of time. So these sections were not accomplished not only by writing the full name of each item, but also including a large depiction of each item. So they made sure that even by sight, you know, like if screw A12, you know, like, well, what does that mean? It doesn't matter. They gave you the actual picture of it, like this is what it literally looks like in the palm of your hand, right? And the actual size as well, so that you could identify it by sight to make sure you had everything there. The genre also informed the reader by creating carefully organized step-by-step directions, right? So I think I spoke to that earlier in the first video. Everything was step-by-step. There were pictures to go with it. Each step and sometimes number had a coordinating depiction to illustrate the action. So because the directions are incredibly short. And I also found that this genre focused considerably on the audience by taking care to guide the reader through each step to a desired end of a successful installation, and to use okay, so yeah, so I was saying that to make sure that the depictions match what is being said. Okay. So if we go back to the PowerPoint slide, so that was a little bit about the audience and the purpose. So I spent a couple paragraphs saying, hey, here's what I found and what I know about the audience, and here's how I found it being displayed inside of the actual artifact itself. All right, so rhetorical considerations. So how does each genre help to establish the information's credibility? Is it effective? How does each genre help to evoke an emotional response? Which emotions and why? What types of evidence are used to support the claims of the information in the genre? Is it appropriate? Why or why not? So let's talk about rhetorical considerations. That's where I move next in this essay. So I said one significant rhetorical consideration to analyze is how the genre informs a largely ignorant audience to the technical operation without being overwhelming with information. So, what the company or the company of the product is trying to do is they're trying to tell you without being there to tell you how to install their product, which at times can seem incredibly complex, especially depending upon your experience with installation processes. So they need to be successful at this, whether you've done it 20 times or whether this is your first attempt. So I talked about the step-by-step order and how it's presented in the manual. I talked about how it included text depictions. I talked about everything being numbered. I talked about how each step includes hardly any technical language. So they use very basic, common language that anybody should be able to pick up on, right? So you don't have to be an industry specialist to understand this. You just have to understand basic language. If any, then I said if any is used, it's so basic that most people would understand. For example, 2 inches would be written as 2, and we see like the little quotation marks for in place for inches. So I think most people understand the idea the foot is 1 tick, inches is 2 ticks at the top of the number. And that's exactly what they did. So most people, I think I would consider that some kind of technical language, but it's the kind of technical language that most people would understand. So I also said that the genre is careful to call a part as it's labeled when depicted, right? So we're not confusing items and the parts. That we're using the same name across the board. So let's see. Then I talked about the rhetorical considerations described in the collection have an important impact on the audience, right? So I think we're moving into the emotional part of this. So first, it establishes credibility. When a product is successfully installed and operational, the customer is likely to be pleased with the brand and may recommend it to others. This is true, right? When something goes well, we talk about it. When something doesn't go well, we also talk about it and we leave a recommendation. Don't ever buy from this company, or don't ever try to install this. You know, it was a terrible experience. And if you think about it, you know, word of mouth can make a difference. And if you have an unhappy customer that tried to install something unsuccessfully, they're going to tell their friends, and their friends are going to be cautious about either buying your piece of your product, or being cautious about ever trying to install anything like a ceiling fan, right? They may not even want to try it, which both could lead to no growth in your sales. So negative sales growth, right? And that's not what you want. You want positive sales growth. So you want them to have the feeling of being confident that the product was properly installed and function as it should. So if they're successfully able to do that, that's going to lead to positive emotional response right here, right? So it's this genre of instruction manuals is looking to eliminate feelings of frustration and anger, and you know, sometimes tight spaces. Suppose you're working underneath the sink and you're trying to install a garbage disposal. You know, you're on your back, or you're on your stomach, reaching up, you know, like you're already in a frustrated position because it's irritating, it's hard, and the last thing you need is something to go wrong. And you don't want to have negative emotional responses, and that usually manifests itself in foul language and throwing of objects, right? Or screaming. I've been there. That's happened to me. And so you want to have positive emotional responses. So it needs to go as smoothly as possible. And so I found that this genre did it through simple, non-technical, and short texts, both written and illustrated. The genre guides and the user were trying to eliminate any feelings of frustration or negativity. And I felt like they were successful in that. So I also found that this structure of the genre is greatly affected by its audience. So let me see. So we're moving on to the idea of structure of the genre. How is the information shaped by the genre? How is the genre organized to convey its message? And how does the structure facilitate the purpose and information of the genre? So this paragraph here is this slide. So this analysis found that the structure of the genre is greatly affected by its audience. When people engage in a do-it-yourself installation project, they have limited time to complete it. This isn't something they have all day or all weekend to do. People are busy, they have lives, and they need their house to work, right? So it's reasonable to expect that something should be done in just a few hours. So with that in mind, the genre gives only information that is critical to completing the project. I found that in every single manual. They don't elaborate on anything. Like, what do you need to know to get this thing up and working? That is all that's in there. So each manual tends to be very short by using a low page count. Information is also separated by using different font sizes. So, if you start a new step or new section, it's going to give you a different font size or, bolded size to let you know you're moving on. If it's, sub-stepped, different font sizes again, or bold to indicate that you're in a subset step. And then the illustrations that accompany the written instruction are also larger in scale, right? So typically the writing takes up half the page and the picture will take up the other half or something like that. It was also found that the page count could be lessened if illustrations were smaller, but they don't do that, right? So like even though they could save money by printing fewer pages, they don't do that because they need the big illustrations there. Let's see, what else did I found? Okay, so I found that this consideration would also affect the emotion of the user and how they'll feel while working on the project. Not being able to easily see the manual will frustrate the reader and possibly the project, right? Because if they didn't see that they were supposed to do something and they thought they'd installed it correctly, they may have to back up a step to complete that step, and that is just irritating because it takes up time and it could, foul up moving forward. All right, so I kind of go over those ideas. Whoops, what's that about? All right, and so style and language, how formal and informal is the language, what specialized vocabulary is used. So I kind of talked about that further up when I talked about, how where's the 2 inches example? So right up here in rhetorical considerations, I threw these guys in there. So no, they don't have a lot of technical languages being used, no specialized vocabulary. Now this might be different from, like, say, a recipe where they use words like fold or whip or I don't know, those are the only 2 things that come to mind, but you get the point, right? Those are directions, those are shortcuts in the cooking genre to say this is something you need to do in addition to cooking, right? So you have to do that. Well, I didn't find any of that sort of technical language in the instruction manuals. They kept it very simple. So there wasn't any real specialized vocabulary except for the 2 ticks for the inch mark that I found. In fact, I would say that the major language features that I noticed was that it was very, very simple English, right? We are trying to make this so that anybody, a 5th grader, could do this and understand, right? A 5th grader could read it and tell you what it means, right? So it's very, very simple. So they have a very broad audience that they're working with, and they're trying to make sure that everybody is able to do this. Whoops. Oh my gosh, I did it again. Okay, here we go. All right, so discussion for the conclusion. So the conclusion talked about a couple of things. So I just said, well, first it's asking us, why is the genre effective in conveying its message? offer a final comment on the impact of the genre to the audience. So I just said the genre is effective in its task because it works hard to stay focused on the rhetorical situation, something we haven't really talked about in this class, so don't worry about that. It understands who its audience is, people largely ignorant of the installation project before them, and strives to successfully guide the reader from start to finish with ease. It does not burden them with information that is not required for the task or technical information that could lead to confusion and non-understanding. So basically what I'm doing in this paragraph is I'm just simply taking the highlights that I found from each paragraph and I'm discussing it. I'm saying this is why it's credible. This is why it works. And then my offer of a final comment on the impact of the genre to its audience. I just said it is the opinion of this analysis that in order to produce a successful instruction manual, the manual should share some of these basic elements that have been discovered in the analysis and are directly related to the rhetorical situation. Again, we haven't talked about that, so don't worry about that. But what am I talking about? This genre strives to give their reader an experience that is reinforced with positive emotions during the process rather than negative ones that are often experienced. All of these elements come together in the genre of instruction manuals to help people in the do-it-yourself projects. So that is what the impact is, to try and give people a positive experience, right, in installing whatever it is they are trying to install. So this has been an example of an analysis that I quickly did. You'll also notice that I completed the works cited page for them. But for your genre analysis, you're interested in looking at how your field communicates with each other, right? That's the purpose of this. So you want to look through and say, hey, if I had to write a communication or if I wanted to speak about a topic that I thought was important in my field, how do I do that? What does that look like? Because, well, in academia, we are very comfortable writing essays. Like I've been reading your guys' essays, and some of them have a slightly different format, like APA. Like I see a blending of not necessarily MLA, but those are small differences, right? In essence, it's an essay. We get that. We know how to do that. But outside of academia, in environments of the workplace, we don't really write in essays, right? We don't really do that. So how do you say, hey, I want to talk about an important issue. I want people to read this. I want it to, be widely read. What does that look like? So go to your field. We've kind of talked about important topics within your field. What's important? Suppose you wanted to contribute to that conversation. How would you do that? What does your communication look like? And so gather some artifacts from your field and how your field communicates, and just kind of explain this in a paper. What is it trying to do with its audience? How does it accomplish that? So that someday you can say, hey, I've got a topic I want to talk about, and you already know how to talk about it. So that's kind of the goal of this essay project. So I'm also going to have this essay available on PDF. You guys can go through and read that yourselves and kind of use that as an example as you're completing your own work. So that's about it for today. I look forward to reading your guys' genre analysis and discussion posts coming up. All right.